Greetings, YouTubers. It's time for another edition of Refuting Liberal Talking Points. When the liberals aren't criticizing Bush rightfully for spending like a drunken sailor, sometimes they'll change their story, and hopefully the person that corrected them the first time is not watching. When they told him, well, you guys voted for most of this stuff too, and you guys started some of these massive entitlement programs that are costing us tens of billions in the future. But entitlements aren't the focus of this. But liberals are a funny lot. You know, they can go back and forth. Bush can spend too much, and then even recently Senator Claire McCaskill, dummy crap Missouri, came out and said Bush had been starving the federal budget. That's laughable. She's a senator. Evidently I know more about the budget than she does. But again, she is a Democrat. Watching liberals is kind of like going to the zoo and watching monkeys throw their own dung around. It's amusing, but you know, at the same time it's galling. So we'll go over, has Bush cut, well, liberals often assert that education spending is starved. We don't spend enough on education. We need to spend more. But is that the truth? Has education spending been starved under the 8 years of Bush? No, it hasn't. In fact, we'll give you some fast facts here to refute any liberal who comes up with this nonsense. According to the Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics, districts spent on an average of $5,247 per pupil in 1970. That's $2,008. Today, the average is about $12,000. How is it possible that districts could have trouble covering higher gas prices when they have an extra $6,500 to spend per pupil? And this is in response to some liberal who was wringing their hands. Some libtard was wringing their hands that the school districts can't afford to gas up the buses. Since 1970, total public school employment has nearly doubled to over 6.1 million people, while total enrollment has increased by less than 9%. It is to support this army of new public school employees that taxpayers are being asked for more and more funding each year. If the public schools were to return to the student-staff ratio they had in 1970, they would have an extra $100 billion per year with which to fill the tanks of the nation's school buses. And unless we start busing kids to Mars, that should probably cover it. Federal public K-12 programs saw substantial increases during the Bush administration. All told, their budgets grew 36%. The funding levels for No Child Left Behind, which most Democrats supported, and Republicans unfortunately, increased 41%. And special education spending rose 68%. No cut. Nothing was cut. Okay, since 1985, real federal spending, that's inflation adjusted, on K-12 education has increased by 138%, but higher federal spending has not corresponded with equal improvement in American educational performance, as judged by long-term test scores and graduation rates. Years of federal spending increases on higher education have not come close to solving the problem of college affordability. In the academic year 2006-2007, the federal government spent more than $86 billion on student aid for post-secondary education, a real increase of 77% over what was spent 10 years ago. Yet paying for college tuition continues to present a significant challenge for many American families. Over the past decade, the real cost of 2 semesters at 4-year private and public colleges has increased by 29% and 41% respectively. Some economists have argued that ever-rising federal subsidies for higher education contribute to the problem of rising college tuition prices by making American students less sensitive to price increases, while a $500 Pell Grant increase per pupil costing $15.6 billion may be a welcome benefit for eligible students. It is not a long-term solution for addressing the problem of college affordability. There's a federal Department of Education monopoly, a public monopoly on schools, and as I've said before, Democrats usually hate monopolies unless it's a public school system. So it's not getting starved. It's ridiculous to assert that. From 1970 to 2005, per child education spending, adjusted for inflation, grew from $4,060 to $9,266. Waste aside, if throwing cash at education jolted an economy, as Hussein Obama insists, then we should all be swimming in Benjamins right now. Under the Bush administration, education spending boomed 64% from 2000 to 2006. In 2007, taxpayers shelled out $71 billion for elementary and secondary education, $36 billion for post-secondary education, and $7.6 billion for what the feds classify as other education programs. Despite this record funding, liberals still mindlessly assert that we need a new fistful of dollars. To them, federal and state budgets ravaged by avaricious spending aren't calls for fiscal tightening. They're green lights to raid the public treasury. So, in review, there is no starving of public education going on. State, local, and federal funding for education has exploded. It's going way past levels of inflation. Mainly, if all states implemented what's called the 65% solution, where 65% of their education funding had to go to the classroom, like new desks, new computers, higher teacher pay, more teachers, whatever, instead of bureaucracy, they could literally save, depending on the state, hundreds of millions or more, without hire more teachers and whatever, get more computers, without raising taxes 1 cent. It wouldn't cost the taxpayers 1 cent, but a lot of it goes to bureaucracy and it's wasted. As you can see, massive increases in education funding, i.e. throwing money at the problem, which is what liberals do with virtually everything, it doesn't work. So we need to reform it. Obviously, throwing more money at the problem will not do it.